Hello, welcome for a new video on the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. As you know, within Tantric yoga, which is most of yoga, in fact, the practice of rising vital energy is quite famous, and it is well known under the name of Kundalini. So today we're going to see 3 verses teaching 3 experiences or 3 practices of awakening through the arising of that energy. So let me first read to you the verses in Sanskrit, or the first verse, which is the verse number 28. āmūlāt kiraṇābhāsāṃ sūkṣmātarātmikam cintayet dviṣaṭkānte śyāmyantīm bhairavodayaḥ. So after these practices around vital breath and paying attention to the movement, the natural movement of breath, as a kind of mantra recitation or a kind of prayer, or being somehow the life of the Absolute at the scale of our own individual existence, now we have the rising of vital breath more through visualizations. So, āmūlāt, starting from the chakra, you know that word, chakra, there are several chakras within the subtle body. āmūlāt, the commentator says, janmadhārat, starting from the basis, the ground of birth, and up to 12-finger breath above the top of the head, that is around 20-25 centimeters above the top of the head, in the space like that. There is the Supreme Goddess present in the shape of a thin, straight tube of light, kiraṇābhāsāṃ, shining like the sun, and being sūkṣmāt, sūkṣmatarātmikam, being more and more subtle, like a hair, like a very thin hair, stretching from bottom to the space above the head. Cintayet, one should visualize her, meditate on her, feel her. And she is marucchatim, she is the energy of breath, the energy of life, the energy that is life. Because remember, first awareness, universal consciousness, transforms herself into life, into the visible movements of life. And within the body that she transforms herself into, she remains pure as the central channel, madhyanari, the sushumna also called. Cintayet, cintayet. One should visualize her, and even more than that, one should feel her. Most subtle. She is in the center. All those channels of energy are said to spread through the body, just like the small branches inside a leaf. When you take a leaf, there are many branches of the sap of the plant spreading through it, and there is usually one main channel, and that is like the central channel. You can feel it in the back of your body, and spreading through the arms, through the legs, and through all the openings of the senses. And she is going up to 12 finger breadth above the top of the head. And then śyāmyantīm, she's going upward, more and more subtle. And there she is going into peace. śyāmyantīm. Itam sūkṣmātarātmikam dhyayakarasya dhyana prakarsha uttapita sya galanat Bhairava sarupata bhavati. And like that one becomes divine, because, and here it is the main point of that practice, that's the main trick, it's dhyana prakarsha. It's because of that visualization reaching its perfection, because it's becoming so intense that the energy of awareness is reaching the most subtle state, beyond the subtle, and the state of the divine, because the most subtle state of energy is the divine state. That's the idea. Remember that always. Energy or Shakti is the door to the divine, and the different states of Shakti decide what state you're in. And here the practice is that one's attention, because all those practices are always practices of attention, one's attention takes a ride on that central channel, starting with the attention on the bottom, rising slowly, more and more subtle, and you feel as it rises, as your attention rises along that path, that it becomes more and more subtle. And it rides like a surfer takes on a wave, up to the space, the most subtle space above the head, getting lost into that infinite space, that infinite quiet, that infinitely subtle light, which is awareness herself. So for that practice, you sit down, you close your eyes, and you visualize, and you feel that light. More important than visualization is the feeling of the light within you, and the feeling of writhing, opening, and expanding into space above the head. It's just like an inverted, upside-down pyramid, starting thin below, and as it rises and becomes more and more subtle, it opens up, and it becomes like a huge opening into space, as if you were wearing a huge hat, like a cook's hat. So that's the first practice, and that practice, as many others, what is important is not the quantity, it's the quality of it. So it's better to make short sessions. And what is important as well is not to lean too much on the practice itself, but rather to aim at the experience of full awareness, of opened awareness, of spacious awareness. Because really those experiences, those games, those pointing out instructions are just means. So don't get lost in them. Don't get lost into the means. Rise and jump, as it were, into infinite awareness, open wide. The second verse, the second experience, verse 29. First in Sanskrit. Om udgacchantīṃ taḍitrūpām praticakraṃ kramām ūrdhvaṃ muṣṭitrayaṃ yāvat tāvad ante mahodayaḥ. So here it is a variation of the same practice around visualization of that central channel, which is the spatial, the visual equivalent of pure awareness, naked between two thoughts or between two breaths. Okay? So udgacchantīṃ, one should visualize her again, rising up, udgacchantīṃ, going up. And she is taḍitrūpām, she is like a lotus fiber, very thin, supple, slender, soft to the touch. And maybe, even though it is not said here, not even in the commentaries, maybe she should be seen as deep blue, but a powerful blue, deep blue, blue like the uppermost part of the sky when you're in the mountains, a really deep blue sky, that deep blue that you can see at the top of the sky dome. Tameva shaktim taḍitrūpām. No, sorry, tadit does not mean, my mistake, does not mean lotus fiber. It means a lightning. She's like a lightning. She is bright, like a lightning. Vidyutvat. She is like a very bright lightning. And she is going up praticakraṃ, through each wheel, kramāt, in the due order. So in that tradition here, as it is described, usually there are not only 7 chakras, as you may know, but rather 12. But this is not very important. Even if you visualize 6 chakras or whatever, this is not important, because here we don't dwell on those chakras, on those wheels. We rise up through them. As Abhinavagupta, a great master of the tradition, says, dwelling, stopping, and paying attention to each chakra is an aim, is a purpose, a legitimate purpose for those who seek supernatural powers or mundane accomplishments. But for those who aim for liberated awareness, they just rise. They don't linger on those wheels, because those wheels, they're not the absolute. They are just stages of consciousness, of universal consciousness, and they are still somehow more or less kramām, they are more or less contracted. So we don't linger on them. Ūrdhvaṃ muṣṭitrayaṃ yāvat, until we reach the 3 fist breath above the head. So this is just another way of measuring the 12-finger breath. 3 fists is supposed to be like 12-finger breath. So it's again more or less 20 centimeters above the head. Tāvad ante, so much that in the end, at the end of that much, mahodayaḥ, there is the rising of full awareness, full consciousness, universal consciousness. And again, it is the same gesture, the same inner gesture of attention, of awareness, starting contracted, going up along that path, that movement of going up and opening is the same thing. And only here in the commentary of Ananda, which is a little earlier than Śivaḥ, he tells us that feeling, he gives a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, Aham sarvasya prabhavo, I am the source of everything. So it is the feeling of being the source of everything. Mattah sarvam pravartate, from me everything proceeds. Everything goes on from me. Tathacha sarvo mamayam vibhava. Everything is my display, my manifestation. So this is a quote from the Praticakraṃ, the great main basic text teaching poem of the recognition philosophy, which is the topmost philosophy. Sarvo mamayam vibhavaha ityevam parijanata, for the one who recognizes that is the one who recognizes the source of everything in his own present awareness. Vishvatmano vikalpānam, for the one who recognizes himself or herself as the self of everything and everyone, vikalpānam prasarepi, even though the thoughts and the perceptions continue and the movements of attention continue, he has the supreme lordship. He is the master. Not the master in the social sense, but in the spiritual sense of being the source of all, and so being the master of all. Because when you recognize yourself as awareness, you recognize yourself as the mistress, the master of all, because everything depends on awareness, and awareness does not depend on anything else. So awareness is the mistress of all. That is recognition. That is the teaching. That is the philosophy of recognition. And so it is the same practice. And then we have one last practice about those visualization of those chakras, the subtle body. Before going into that, I would just add that it's really not so important to dwell on the clarity of the picture that you make in your mind. You don't even need really to visualize anything. It's not so much visual. It is more a question of feeling, of inner feeling. So just anytime, any place, you can just give yourself a moment to feel that upward going wave of subtle energy, and your attention is riding, as it were, that wave of subtle feeling upwards into space, like you're throwing back your attention, which is usually fragmented and contracted. You throw her back into space. And so you go back again and again and again, like an offering, like a prayer. You offer your tensed sensations in the stomach, inside your body. You offer them to space, like prayers, like offerings into the fire. And then more and more you have the experience that even though the movements of attention, of energy, of your senses, of your mind arise again and go on, still there remains that background awareness of open sky. So the last verse for today is the verse 30. Om kramadvādaśakaṃ samyag dvādaśākṣarabheditam sthūlasūkṣmaparasthityā muktvāntataḥ śivaḥ. So here it's more or less the same practice. I try to translate through a scale of 12, the 12 chakras, correctly and fully dvādaśākṣarabheditam, practicing over them the 12 syllables. We're going to see what they are. sthūlasūkṣmaparasthityā, through the state of being gross, then subtle, and finally supreme. Muktvā, having freed, so that can be interpreted in different ways, but having dropped away each chakra, one after the other, Tataḥ, then one becomes again divine, Tataḥ śivaḥ. So the commentary states for us the different chakras. There are janmagra, literally the tip of the birth, that is the tip of the sexual organ, of the penis for the males, of the clitoris for the females. And then Mula Kanda Nabi Hritkantha Talu Brumadhya Lalarta Brahmarandra Shakti Vyapini. So those are the 12 stages. We don't need to enter very much into too much details about this. But here just the difference with the two previous experiences is that here we dwell a little bit with attention on each of those chakras. So that practice can be seen in two different ways. You can do 3 times the practice all over again through all the chakras, or you can do the practice once for every chakra. So for instance, you start with the Mūladhara, the lowest chakra, and you start with the reciting verbally or mentally the vowel A. So you recite the 12 vowels, more or less corresponding with 12 places in the body. A, I, U, U, E, I, O, Au, Ah. So you distribute that more or less in those 12 places. And each time, at the same time that you recite those vowels, you visualize that the wheels, the corresponding wheel of the chakra, starts to turn and to become fiery or luminous, throwing light, shining. And for the most subtle state, well, that is the light. Jyotirūpatam praptam. So the gross stage would be reciting the vowel. Then the subtle stage would be the wheel starting to turn and to become a flame. And the third stage, the supreme stage, would be that the wheel starts to become really luminous and to melt into light. And you do that for the 12 chakras. And the last two are and Ah, the Anuswara and Visarga, because those two syllables have names in Sanskrit. and they correspond to the last two chakras, Shakti and Vyapini. So there are two spots above the top of the head, more or less here. And in fact, you can visualize more or less like 4 fingers between each of them. But this is just a way of speaking, because of course you cannot measure those finger breadth above your head when you're practicing. So you close your eyes, you sit comfortably, and you recite those 12 vowels going up. So it's like ah, ah, I, u, e, I, o, au, ah. So you start with the Janmagra, then there is the tip of the sexual organ, whatever it is, and then there is the Mūla, the Mūladhara, then there is the Kanda, which is a little bit below the navel, then there is the navel, then there is the heart, then the throat, then the top of the palate inside the mouth, the upper palate, then there is between the eyebrows, then there is the front of the head, then there is the top of the head, then there is that point called Shakti, just a little bit above the top of the head, then finally Vyapini above the top of the head. And through that, the vital energy, the Kundalini attention is rising. So it's again the same basic practice. And here I think one should not fall into the trap of being too much attached to the clarity of the visualization itself. Why? Because feeling is more important than vision. Why? Because according to the tradition, the sense of touch and inner feeling is more important. Perhaps in those traditions, visions are slightly less important than, say, in Tantric Buddhism. Tantric Buddhism, many visualizations of deities, mandalas, mantras turning, and it must be very detailed. And there are many subtle stages about that. For example, in Guhya Samaja Tantra, there is a whole lot of detailed efforts put into those visualizations. So vision is very important, especially generally in Buddhism. The visual aspect is very important. Here in Shaiva tradition, the feeling, the touch aspect is more important. So that's all for today. Thank you, and see you the next time.